Hello, good afternoon. I'm Rachel Patton, Executive Director of Preserve Arkansas. Preserve Arkansas is the statewide nonprofit advocate for historic preservation. Welcome to our Women in Preservation virtual speaker series. This series features Arkansas women who are working to save the state's historic places. This series is generously supported by DMX Architecture in Fayetteville. Thank you so much to DMX for their support. Some quick housekeeping items for you. Please type your questions for Dr. Hawkins and Ms. Miles into the Q&A, and they will answer them live at the end of the presentation. Please use the chat to visit with other participants and make comments about how wonderful the talk is. But if you have a question and you would like it to be answered at the end, please type it into the Q&A. Thank you. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our speakers. Dr. Ruth Hawkins, Director Emeritus of Arkansas State University Heritage Sites, led restoration and development of the Hemingway Pfeiffer Museum, Johnny Cash Boyhood Home, Historic Dias Colony, Southern Tenant Farmers Museum, Lakeport Plantation, and the Historic Kays House. She taught historic preservation and heritage tourism courses in A-State's Heritage Studies PhD program and served as Executive Director of Arkansas Delta Byways Tourism Association. Hawkins is the recipient of numerous state and national awards in preservation and tourism, including the Parker Westbrook Award for Lifetime Achievement from Preserve Arkansas, a National Preservation Award from the National Trust for Historic Preservation, and the Arkansas Historical Association's Lifetime Achievement and Diamond Awards. She has been cited in the Congressional Record for Preservation Leadership and is a member of the Arkansas Women's Hall of Fame and a state advisor to the National Trust for Historic Preservation. Serving with Dr. Ruth Hawkins for 32 years, Paula Miles retired in 2020 as Assistant Director of Arkansas State University Heritage Sites. She assisted in the restoration of the 4 Heritage Sites museums at ASU and the restoration of the historic Kays House on the ASU campus. Later, she helped move the Heritage Sites offices to the restored Kays structure and set up the Governor Mike Beebe office in the main living room. Paula met with architects to finalize museum plans and worked with design companies to create museum exhibits. She assisted with fundraising events, helped plan the grand openings for each site, and organized the gift shops, including ordering specialty items unique to each site. Paula also helped develop the outdoor exhibits at the Rower Relocation Camp, narrated by George Takei. She currently is Executive Secretary and Treasurer for the Arkansas Delta Byways Regional Tourism Association, serving the 15 counties in eastern Arkansas. Paula has received multiple Distinguished Performance Awards for her work with the ASU Heritage Sites and Special Recognition and Outstanding Member Awards from Arkansas Delta Byways. Please welcome Dr. Ruth Hawkins and Paula Miles.
Well, thank you. We're glad to be able to share our experience with you today. And I'm going to share my screen here if I can get. Okay. I want to start out by telling you that I don't have a formal background in preservation. My first 10 years I spent as a newspaper and television reporter in Virginia. And then my first 20 years at Arkansas State University, I spent doing development, fundraising, and public relations. The only real experience that I had in doing any preservation work was 3 historic homes that my husband and I lived in, one in Virginia, one here in Jonesboro, and one in Paragould. So I really kind of stumbled into preservation by accident about 25 years ago. We were working with the mayors and county judges and other leaders in the Delta region on trying to create Crowley's Ridge as a national scenic byway. As part of that, we were able to apply for National Scenic Byway funding. And our idea was that if the university became involved in this and we helped, then it could serve as a laboratory for our students as well as an economic catalyst for the communities where these projects were located. So a lot of these projects involve preservation, and I enjoyed it so much, had so much fun doing it, that I ultimately stepped away from my job as vice president for advancement to devote full time to preservation and to working with communities in the Delta. And I've been very fortunate over the years in working with some really great people. And one of those who has been all of these sites all along has been Paula Miles. So I'll turn it over to her and let her tell you about her background.
Well, when I started at ASU, I worked in the University and Government Relations Department and for the vice president there, and Dr. Hawkins was the vice president for institutional advancement. The university was in a building phase with then President Dr. Les Wyatt, and there was always a groundbreaking or dedication or a grand opening ceremony somewhere on campus. And it took both of the departments to get the job done. Then Dr. Hawkins started with the projects we're going to talk about. I don't have a historic preservation background either. However, I do have a knowledge of construction. I work alongside my husband, banker turned contractor, building spec houses and rental houses. We too have built 4 houses of our own. He does the custom houses and commercial buildings on his own. I don't bother him there. I love every minute of the process, from the planning to the problem solving. But my favorite part is the completed project. We were new to the granting process for restoring these sites, and I could help with the grants as I worked with sponsored programs and procurement at ASU. We've stumbled, we've laughed, we've cried, and sometimes we pulled our hair out, but we have a satisfaction knowing that these sites were not only saved, but they are restored. I'm proud to have worked for and with Dr. Hawkins on all of her projects.
So we thought today first about sharing just some information about the Dice Colony and the Johnny Cash Boyhood Home. But we decided that we really need to tell you a bit about all of our projects because we learned a lot from each of them, and each one served us well in addressing problems with the other sites. So we're going to start with, hang on. There we go. Okay. We're going to start with the Hemingway Pfeiffer Museum and Educational Center. And this came about because we were looking at an attraction to anchor the north end of the Crowley's Ridge Parkway. I knew a little bit about the fact that Ernest Hemingway had some ties to the Pfeiffer family in Piggott, so we sent a photographer up there to scout out the place and see if there was anything that might be developed as a. Well, he came back and said not only did the Pfeiffer home and barn studio still exist, but the house was for sale. So we went back and talked about this, and we really didn't have any money for acquiring any properties, but we really felt that somebody needed to do something quickly because otherwise we were afraid it would be sold into private hands or maybe even be torn down, and that we would lose the opportunity to do anything with it as a heritage site. So since we had no money, we went to Sherlin and Barbara Hamilton, who are a couple that live in Rector, which is near Piggott. And they were graduates of Arkansas State University. And we asked them if they would head up a fundraising committee to raise funds for this project. And they thought about it for maybe 2 seconds and then declined and said, no, we don't like asking people for money, but what we'll give you $300,000. And we'll give that as a challenge gift, a 2-to-1 gift, so that you have to raise $600 in order to get our full $300. So we did that, and I'll tell you a little bit about the matching funds for that in a minute. But now the reason this project, the property is significant, most of you probably know, but it's significant because Ernest Hemingway's in-laws, Paul and Mary Pfeiffer, live there. They frequently had Pauline and her husband, Ernest Hemingway, back as house guests for long periods of time. Left their sons there while they went off on other vacations. And so the Pfeiffers converted their barn into really a studio for Ernest to give him privacy for writing. And it was in this studio that he wrote portions of A Farewell to Arms and other short stories. But also Paul Pfeiffer was important in his own right because Paul owned 63,000 acres of land and basically was involved in the development of Northeast. So one of the first things we did, this is Ernest and Pauline, their wedding picture at the top, and then these are some of the pictures of the kids when they were visiting in Piggott. But one of the we did when we acquired this project in 1997 is hire Claudia Shannon as our restoration director, since we had no experience in restoration. And quite frankly, until I started working with Claudia, I had no idea what a historic structure report was. I didn't know much about the Secretary of Interior standards. I didn't know about Section 106 reviews. I didn't know how to get a property on the register, but fortunately this house was already on the register and the barn. So when we acquired them, the house was in fairly decent shape. On the inside, though, they had painted everything white. All the original woodwork was painted white, the walls, the ceilings. And then outside, of course, we had to replace the roof, which had about 10 layers of roofing, I think, underneath it. And of course, we had to update wiring and HVAC systems and so forth. So the barn really, well, excuse me, let me go back. This is the only room that was altered significantly. That was the kitchen. And the Pfeiffers sold this to a family in 1950, and that family essentially tore out all of the windows and put in a metallic, put in the 1950s metal cabinets that were pretty typical for the time. They ripped out the pantry to make the room larger. They put a pass-through from the kitchen into the summer porch. And so they also dropped the ceiling. And so we were very fortunate in that they only dropped it, they didn't tear it out. So we were able to get back to that. So the barn was a little bit more difficult task because this was owned by the son of the woman who owned the house, and he had made it into his apartment. So he had blocked off the pass-through that you see by where the car is. He had put wood siding over the original wood siding, and he had cut the inside of various rooms for his apartment. So we had a lot of undoing to do in that case. But fortunately, he had left the original hardware on the doors and the windows were original. And we also left, when we were doing the restoration, we left all those charred marks that you see at in the top right picture because they were really an important part of telling our story. Those marks in 1932, when Hemingway was there and writing out in the studio, the barn caught on fire. And so he wound up tossing all of his manuscripts out the window and all of his hunting clothes that he had brought with him. And he was able to salvage a few things, but he lost quite a bit in this fire. And so we decided that we needed to keep that char mark. One of the important lessons that we learned from Claudia, which has really been helpful in all of our projects, is that we shouldn't lift a hammer or do anything unless we had documented it with at least 3 sources. So for instance, we knew that we had the house colors right when we painted it because we did core samples, which we sent to a laboratory for analysis. We did oral history interviews with some of the housekeepers that had been there around the time that Ernest Hemingway was there. And then we also used visual inspection. And in this case, for instance, we knew that the radiators had been added in the 1930s. And so when we looked behind the radiators, lo and behold, we found the same colors that had come back from the paint analysis and from the housekeepers' memories. So Paula, I'll switch back to you.
Okay. One of the interesting things about the house was that every room had a tin ceiling, each with a different pattern. This was because the house was built in 1910 as the private residence of W.D. Buck Templeton. He built all the downtown commercial buildings, and he was using scraps left from those buildings to build his house. So they were all painted white when we got the property. Where the paint had chipped away, there was beautiful patina, and we had so hoped that the ceilings were at one time natural, but that was not the case, as the metals had simply oxidized to the exposure over the years. Originally, they had been painted various shades of grays, greens, or beiges, whatever paint he had left over from downtown. And one of the designs in the bedroom used by Ernest and Pauline had a face in it that reminded us of the old man in the sea. So we made this one of the HP logos. It's the one just above, well, it's in the logo, and see it up there in the bottom middle.
Another really valuable lesson we learned involved the local community as much as we could and in as many ways as we could. And in these pictures, you see 2 young women from the Piggott area, Jonna Redmond and Sabrina Holofield. And these 2 young women had been hired by the roofer to come along and pick up all of the roofing debris that was being thrown off the roof and haul it off to the dump. And one day we had a representative from the company that we were looking at for using the paint stripper for the woodwork. And he had come down from Chicago to demonstrate how to use this. And Jonna and Sabrina watched him doing this and said, well, we can do that. And so we wound up hiring them, and they did the restoration really throughout the entire house of all of the woodwork. And then Becky Witzel taught them how to remove the paint from the radiators and put back the original powders that had been on the radiators. And when we opened the house, we hired Jonna and Sabrina. Jonna became our longtime, she just retired recently, but Jonna became our office manager, gift shop manager, and tour guide. And Sabrina became a tour guide as well as our housekeeper and our general maintenance person. So together with Diana Sanders, and Diana Sanders had worked as my assistant on the main campus for 15 years, and Diana agreed to go to Piggott as the on-site director. And these 3, Diana, Sabrina, and Jonna, really were responsible for bringing this museum to life. So the funding for this, I mentioned the 2-to-1 challenge grant. We did get $620,000 from the National Scenic Byways program. We also got some general improvement funds thanks to Representative Richard Simmons. And we got funding from the Arkansas Natural and Cultural Resources Council. So nearly $2 million in grants for this project. So our next project is Tenant Farmers Museum. And in 2006, this building was listed on Preserve Arkansas's list of endangered places. And the director at that time, of course, it was the Historic Preservation Alliance of Arkansas at the time, but the director, Jim Walsmith, was trying to work with the community to come up with some way of saving the Mitchell East building. And he wasn't able to have them apply for NCRC funds because you have to be a state agency in order to qualify for those funds. And so he came to the university and asked us if we would be willing to take this on. And after a bit of negotiation and us saying that we really couldn't take on another project, we agreed to take on this project. And this project is significant because this building, the Mitchell East, was the building that housed the first integrated agricultural union in the country. It was the first union to involve both Black and white farmers and both men in leadership positions in that union. And the union met in a building owned by H.L. Mitchell and Clay East. H.L. Mitchell owned the dry cleaners, which you see in the photos above, and he's standing there in the front on the front porch with his tie. And Clay East owned the other part of the building, and he operated that as a service station. And so these two men were instrumental in helping to form the union. They happened to be socialists and were very concerned about the plight of their fellow man. And so a lot of the community at that time called that section of town Red Square. But they were very instrumental in getting the union established. And until the headquarters had to be moved to Memphis because of all the threats of violence on these buildings. So Paula.
Okay, one of the first things we did after acquiring the property from the city was to remove all the modifications and get rid of the siding. We called it a peel away day. Unfortunately, we found what we found was the brick was in desperate need of tuck pointing and the walls were leaning terribly. Okay, next slide. There you go. To be able to keep the brick, the walls were braced on the outside until they could erect a steel structure on the inside and then tie the walls to this metal structure. We were late on one wall. We were too late on one wall because a straight line wind came and knocked it down. However, it proved to be beneficial to us because we made that wall complete. We made the wall solid so we could put our exhibits on that wall. And it also made the space of the building more secure. Okay. We faced other issues that created problems. And a big one was the environmental report. Because the building had been a dry cleaners and a service station, various chemicals had leached into the soil, including hydraulic fluid from the station lift. It had also gotten into the town's drainage system. We volunteered to enter into a Brownsfield site agreement, which involved removing the lift and 12 inches of soil around the entire back of the property. This was sent to a landfill in Alabama, the only facility that would take the contaminated soil. Next slide. There you go. The inside of this building was a mess as well, but fortunately our plan was to completely gut the building and make it a black box to house a museum exhibits. We encountered many challenges, but one was, as we were sweeping up the dirt and debris left in the building, we kept sweeping to get to the floor. After getting nowhere, we realized there was no floor. It was just a dirt floor. At this time, it led us to the need to pour a concrete slab through the entire building. Okay. The picture on the left, we came in one day to find that all the electrical switches for the building had been placed in the middle of one wall that was supposed to have exhibits, Claudia Shannon, who worked with us on this project, had the contractor build a hinged wooden panel that swung open and to expose the switches and then closed to hide them. We painted the box gold and hung our exhibit photo on that panel. In the middle photo, the workmen were painting the black walls and got paint splatter everywhere on our brand new concrete floors. To fix it, we simply got the paint out and splattered paint everywhere so that it looked like we'd planned it. Our most disappointing was in the photos on the right, we acquired the bank building next to the Mitchell East building to give us more room. The bank had an original safe with gold leaf trim and lettering. Though highly worn, it had a wonderful patina. We came in one day and discovered that they had painted over it. When we pitched a fit, they assured us that they could remove the new top layer of paint. It didn't work. See the vault at the top? Ultimately, the contractor paid to have the door sent to the original company still in business for restoration. When we got it back, it was certainly better, but not what we had expected.
And building, which we did acquire to serve as offices and restrooms and gift shop for the museum. Had a lot of problems with that south wall of the building because it was very porous brick and missing, partly because it was an inside wall. I don't know if you can tell in that picture on the right, but that was really another building that butted up against the bank building, and it burned down, left this one wall standing. So we tuck pointed the brick, and then we parge coated it, and then we painted the parge coating white, and then we decided we hated the looks of it, and it was in a very visible spot because you approached the museum from this side of the building. So this was the first thing people saw. And we also had not yet determined where we were going to put signage. And so we wound up literally just a few weeks before our grand opening, we hired a woman who came in and painted a cotton mural. We painted the name of the building to fix our signage problem across the top of the building. And along the bottom, we planted cotton and encourage our visitors when it's in bloom, because a lot of our visitors had never seen cotton. So this particular project was just a little under $1 million with $615,000 from NCRC and a challenge grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities. So our next project then was the Lakeport Plantation. And as we were finishing the Hemingway Pfeiffer Museum, and about the time we started working on Southern Tenant Farmers Museum, we were in Kathy Matthews' office. She was the Department of Arkansas Heritage Director at the time. And Les Wyatt, the president of the university then, and I were talking to her on another matter. And she had been to the Hemingway Pfeiffer opening, and she said, boy, I sure wish you all would take on the Lakeport Plantation. It's one of our favorite historic properties in Arkansas. And so we really didn't exactly take her seriously, but we did go. I mentioned it to Claudia Shannon, and Claudia jumped on it immediately and wound up going, calling Mary Beth Frazier, who's also an interior designer who lives in Warren, which was close to Lakeport, and asked her to go over and take a look at it. Well, the bottom line is Claudia put together a wonderful restoration team from across the state that included Mary Beth, but also Claudia's husband, Howard, Charles Witzel, Becky Witzel, Skip Stewart Abernathy, and myself at these early stages. And they spent about a year studying this property and doing the assessment, and they came to the realization that because it was in private hands, there just weren't any grant funds available to do much of anything. So they presented some options to the Angel family, the Sam Epstein Angel family. And the Angels decided that they wanted to donate it to Arkansas State University because they were familiar with the work that we had done at Hemingway Pfeiffer. We finally agreed to take it on under two conditions. Was that the university wanted to make sure that it told the full story, including the story of the enslaved laborers and the tenant farmers on the. And the other caveat was that Claudia's team had to agree to stay together and see us through the entire project. So this particular project is significant for a number of reasons. Number one, it's the only remaining plantation home on the Mississippi River in Arkansas. It also still had a lot of its original finishes. Some were buried under a layer of paint or so, but it still had the original faux marble fireplace mantles. It still had oak grained and rosewood grained doors, and was really a magnificent piece of work. It also was the home of the Johnson family, and the Lycurgus and Lydia Johnson were part of a huge family dynasty in Arkansas, and not just in Arkansas, but in Virginia and Kentucky. They had one relative who was vice president under Martin Van Buren. They had relatives who were governors and judges and territorial judges. So a very influential family in Arkansas before the Civil War. And then, of course, because it had been in continuous cotton production since 1830, enable us to tell an African-American experience that really started with slaves coming in 1831 and clearing the land, working the land up through the Civil War. And then when the war was over, the enslaved laborers, many of them stayed as tenant farmers on the property. And then when agriculture, a lot of them moved to factories in the north to get jobs and to raise their children. And we found in our oral history interviews that some of them were moving back after their children were raised because it was still home to them, and they wanted to retire in Arkansas, and they wanted to be buried among their ancestors. So Claudia and her team started on this project in 2001. The university acquired the program in fall of 2001, and we really began the restoration work in 2002. So what we really acquired was a magnificent structure that had been vacant since 1992. It had deteriorated exponentially. And as our team and the Angels like to say, it really was just one teenage party away from burning down.
Yeah, and we almost lost Kathy Matthews and other staff members of the Department of Arkansas Heritage when we took them out on the second floor balcony, only to discover later that the wood block you see in the center photo at the top was the only thing holding up the railing and the balcony.
Since this was such a long distance from Jonesboro, it was really important to us, someone on site full-time, particularly because our grants, including the Save America, particularly the Save America's Treasures program and the National Endowment for the Humanities, they insisted on the highest level of Secretary of Interior standards. So we were very fortunate to hire Ronnie Walker, who was one of the few graduates of the short-lived historic building trades program in Helena. We also got his wife, Sonia, as a bonus to serve as our office manager. And Ronnie's real passion is windows and doors. And he went through the house and repaired all of the windows and doors that needed repairing. He even found in the attic pieces of the old rose window, which you can see had been boarded up, but the pieces were there, and what pieces weren't there, he was able to reconstruct. And so what you see is a beautiful rose window that he painstakingly restored. Paula.
And thanks to Ronnie Walker, we were also saved from some costly mistakes. A great example is a wood shingle roof. Because there is no fire department nearby, we had hoped we could use an asphalt shingle that looked like wood, but was fire retardant. The Save America's Treasures program insisted, however, that we used authentic wood shingles. The company installed the roof, used a nail gun, which caused the nails to go in too deep into each shingle. Ronnie attempted to stop them, but they would not take direction from him as they reported to the general contractor only. Ronnie checked daily in the attic for signs of leaks, and sure enough, within a matter of weeks, the shingles failed. Ultimately, arbitrators from the Wood Shingle Institute were called in, and the roofer was required to remove and replace the roof, this time under Ronnie's supervision.
Okay, another great find in the house was an original floor cloth that covered the entire hallway. We knew it was original because under one corner it had L.L. Johnson Lakeport Plantation stamped under it. And we really didn't even know that this floor cloth was there because it really turned black over the years from all of the traffic. You can kind of see in that bottom right picture in the corner the black that was over the floor cloth. We didn't really even notice it until somebody spilled water on the floor, and in wiping up the water, all of these flowers started emerging. So then the dilemma was what to do with this floor cloth, because this was in the room that was going to be the most trafficked room in the house, and the floor cloth was very fragile. And after a lot of Becky Witzel and her team finally decided to restore a piece of the floor cloth and display it in the hall where it had been with stanchions around it so that people couldn't walk on it. And then the remainder of the floor cloth was consolidated and rolled up in tubes.
The interior of the house had faux finishes in every room, including the oak grain front door, rosewood grained interior doors, faux marble mantles, and a decorative plaster medallion. All, however, had been painted over in various pastel shades. After painstakingly removing all of the paint using Q-tips, Becky Witzel assessed each door and mantle on an individual basis to determine which ones could simply be cleaned and which ones she needed to repair.
One of the trickiest things in the house was what to do about the heat and air so that it would be comfortable for visitors, but at the same time, we didn't want anything to show in the house, and we didn't want anything that made noise in the house. So we knew that the smokehouse, although it had fallen down a number of years earlier, did have pictures of it, and so we rebuilt the smokehouse. We put all of our mechanical equipment on the floor and up on a mezzanine level that we built, then tunneled over to the house. And by the way, this pipe is the same pipe that was used in laying the transatlantic cable, because they have such a problem with water table there. So then they went up through a chase in the house up to the attic, and then spread out over the entire house and went down through the chimney breast, and the vents were placed in the backs of the fireplace boxes where you couldn't see them. And I put this picture of Charles Witzel here just because I think this was such an ingenious idea on Charles's part and all of his architectural and engineering team. It really was phenomenal.
Another of our serendipitous finds was the original ironwork for the side porch and the balconettes. None of the ironwork was there when we received the house, but we knew that most of it had been removed and some placed on the house in town. After negotiating with the owners to buy it back, we began reassembling and discovered that several sections were missing and would have to be remade. Before we could do that, however, Another storm blew down one of Sam Angel's storage facilities. In cleaning up the debris, they found some decorative ironwork that exactly matched our missing pieces. That's our restoration team on the side porch.
Okay, one of the biggest differences of opinion that we had on our restoration team was how to interpret the house. There were some that wanted to leave it totally empty and just let the architecture speak for itself, kind of like a Drayton Hall. And then there were others that wanted to see the house furnished the way it had been in the mid-19th century. So what we decided to do, we opened the house with nothing in it. And then we waited 5 years. And as visitors went through, we made notes of the kinds of questions that they asked. And based on those questions, then we put exhibits in that address those questions. And we gave strict instructions to the consultants that we were working with on the exhibits that nothing could touch the walls or hang on the walls. Nothing could obstruct any of the architectural features. And so they put everything in the center of the room or panels. And the only furniture in the house is either furniture that was needed to tell the story, like in the kitchen, or Blake Wintry joined our team not long after we opened, and he was successful in tracking down a lot of the original furniture. So where we got original pieces back from the Johnsons, we did include that in the house. I'm going to quickly scan through this, I think, because I want to get to our Dice Johnny Cash. But one of the things that we had found on the property was a crypt, and we thought the crypt was empty because Lydia Johnson had been removed to Kentucky for her burial. That was the boy's mother. We knew this was the crypt of Cable Johnson because it had a CJ on the marker beside it. And because of that marker and because of our genealogy that was Cable Johnson, Randy Gunling helped with a lot of the archaeological work, and they had done magnetic resonance imaging at first, and we hadn't detected any anomalies and like they could be graves. But later on they came along and did ground penetrating radar, and as you can see, they found 2 definite graves, 1 possible grave, and we think there was a 4th child also buried there. I imagine maybe the radar just didn't pick it up.
It gets even more interesting when the Arkansas Archaeological Survey started taking the crypt apart in preparation for its restoration. They discovered a child's jawbone and small pearl buttons, which required them to stop all work and contact us. We went to the A State Finance Office and asked, what is the procedure when we find a body on ASU property? The vice president said, who have you killed now? And all the bones were sent to the Archaeological Survey for cataloging. And after discussions with the Johnson family, they decided to put Cave Johnson, the baby, back in the restored crypt. There was a private ceremony at the grand opening to do this.
And I'm sorry, I wrote Cave on the slides, but it was Cable Johnson.
Cable Johnson. I wanted to, yeah.
That was my fault.
That's okay.
Okay, so this project, it was a $4.2 million project, with most of that coming from the Arkansas Natural and Cultural Resources Council. But we also had money from the National Endowment for the Humanities and the Save America's Treasures program. So that brings us to the historic Dice Colony, Johnny Cash Boyhood Home. And we thought that we were through taking on projects, but several things came along that changed that. First of all, the Dice administration building had been donated to the city, and they were working very hard on trying to restore that building and use it with city hall offices on one side and museum exhibits on the other side. It was pretty slow going because they were doing Dice Days and other local fundraisers and that sort of thing, which was slow going. But by that time, we were also very involved with the Rural Heritage Development Initiative, which was a project through the National Trust for Historic Preservation and Main Street, Arkansas, that was funded through the Kellogg Foundation. And so the Rural Heritage Development Initiative was able to get some funding for them to put a roof on. Well, let me first mention the Rural Heritage Development Initiative also was responsible for these properties on Preserve Arkansas's endangered places list in 2006. So then in 2009, we were contacted by Kirkley Thomas and Carmi Henry, who were two administrators with the Electric Cooperatives of Arkansas, and they were big Johnny Cash fans. And they said, hey, we want you to do something with the DICE administration building and the Johnny Cash Boyhood home. And we said, sorry, we can't. We've got more than we can say grace over, and we don't have the operating funds to really operate the ones that we have now. So Kirkley and Carmi went to Senator Steve Briles from that area, and Senator Briles, unbeknownst to us, introduced a bill in the legislature to appropriate $50,000 to study the feasibility of this property becoming an Arkansas State University heritage site. And so guess how the study came back. It was really just the administration building, because the house, at the time, the Johnny Cash Boyhood home was in private hands. And so the city donated the administration building to us. And the house came along just a little bit later. But this is significant for a number of reasons. One, this was a resettlement colony under the New Deal, and through Roosevelt's experiment, 500 farm families were recruited from all over the state of Arkansas and moved to this colony to get a new start in life. This was in 1934, and they had fallen victim to the Depression and the floods and the droughts, and all in every state and every county in Arkansas were out of work. So the map that you see at the top left, the colony center where all the federal government buildings were, was in that center. And then the little squares, which you probably can't see very well, but the little squares or rectangles all over the map represent the 500 houses that were laid out for the 500 families. And of course, it's significant because among those 500 families was the Ray and Carrie Cash family. And they moved there when their son, Jay, was known then, was 3 years old. And Johnny lived there until he graduated from high school in 1950 and went into the service. That's Johnny that you see at the top left on the right-hand side. That's also him, his senior picture. And then that's him on the steps when he came back in the 1960s for a visit. Paula.
Okay, the donation of this from the city included the administration building and the former Dice Theater and adjacent pop shop. The administration building had been cut into apartments and later used for storage. It had become unusable because the floor joists had given way and the hall floors had caved in. Additionally, we discovered that carpeting we were walking on in the upstairs room was spongy because there was no floor beneath it. The tacks holding the carpet were the only thing preventing us from falling through. And while the theater looked somewhat intact from the street, as in the top picture, the front facade was all that remained. The roof and the 3 other sides had caved in. Okay, after the restoration, we opened the administration building in 2014 and an agreement with the city. They took half one side of the lower level, and exhibits were installed on the other side related to the development of the colony, the lifestyle of the colonists, and the impact of growing up in Dice on Johnny Cash and his music. The theater was another story, and we did not open it until 2 years later after sufficient funds had been raised to rebuild the structure. The building is used as a visitor center and the gift shop. These images show our progress on the theater. It remained propped up during the renovation of the adjacent building, and by the time of the grand opening of the administration building, we had started to make progress on the front facade. We then added the pop shop to the right of the theater dome and built the remaining of the former theater. We preserved as much of the theater as possible. Inside, we left the door going into the projection booth, but though the latter had long disappeared. We found 2 projectors still in the booth. Tommy Cash, Johnny's younger sibling, had been projectionist there while he was in high school and had scratched his name into the projector. He is posing by his autograph marked by the blue tape. He doesn't remember doing that. Okay. This is the inside of the theater and the visitor center. We wanted this building to have special meaning for former colonists who had fond memories, while at the same time, we wanted it to be interesting for people all over the world. At the top of the image, you see the 4 projection holes, and the lighted space in the corner is where we display the projector with Tommy's name. The door to the projection booth is behind that. A film strip mural shows photographs of teens at the pop shop, and printed on the wall above the strip are excerpts of memories taken from their oral histories. On the opposite wall, which you can't see, are lobby cards from movies mentioned as favorites of the theater during the 30s and the 40s.
And I want to make a point that Paula and I really were in the midst of most everything, especially Paula. That's her that you see on the right-hand side on the step stool. She literally had to wrestle that film strip to the wall because they sent it to us all in one piece, which we hadn't expected. And so it was quite comical watching her hold it all up and long enough to get it adhered to the wall. This turned out to be really great because the former colonists and their families come back and they love finding their pictures in this film strip and posing by them. So the woman on the left that you see is the same woman that you see dancing on the left in the slide that's next to her.
Another great memory is the hall separating the theater, now the auditorium, from the pop shop. The wood on the walls and the ceiling are strips from the former Dice gymnasium floor. As this flooring is original, there are free throw lines and other markings. Former Dice basketball players and cheerleaders love to reminisce about memories made on this floor. The former pop shop is now a gift shop, and strips of the gym floor also accent the display cases and the front counter, as well as forming the stage in the auditorium.
We actually also acquired several other properties in the Colony Circle. One that you see above was the foundation of the former cooperative store. And John and Mary Beth Frazier and Warren donated to us the money to acquire that foundation. And right now we use it for performances and special events. And then the picture down below, we have just, the governor gave us the money to acquire this building, and we have turned it into a Dice Rural Research Center. And we just finished this using NCRC money, and it's going to be quite spectacular when we get all the research and everything set up so that we can have scholars from all over the country come to Dice to see all the materials that we have. The picture on the left is out by the house. That's Barbara Tate. She and her family donated that property next to the house, and that's where we have been having our Johnny Cash Heritage Festivals. So all of these projects, including the 2 additional pieces of land that were donated to us, and the administration building and the visitor center came to $4.6 million, again, with the bulk of that coming from the Arkansas Natural and Cultural Resources Council. Obviously, none of these heritage sites would exist without the support of the Arkansas Natural and Cultural Resources Council. We also got a National Endowment for the Humanities grant, as well as some general improvement funds and some other special appropriations. So that brings us to the Johnny Cash Boyhood home. This first photo taken in 1935 is the year that the Cash family moved there. That's young J.R. Cash, or Johnny Cash, standing on the front porch, which you can't see very well. The picture on the right is what it looked like when we bought it. I mean, when we acquired it. Now, one reason we were interested in acquiring this property was because people from all over the world were driving past this house and saying, oh, look, there's where Johnny Cash lived. And man, he lived in really bad conditions. And so it really bothered us that people thought, hey, this is the house that Johnny Cash lived in. When the fact of the matter was, the house that he lived in was a brand new house at the time. It still had the cans of paint sitting on the floor from when they had painted. And I think probably his mother, who kept a very neat house, would have been appalled to see what it had become.
The inside of the house was not much better. The previous owner had cut holes in the original wood walls, including a kitchen pass-through and arched doorways. Windows and doors had been relocated, and the kitchen, pantry, and bedroom closet that once extended into the living room formed an alcove was removed. Many people had memories of JR sitting in the space listening to music on the radio. Fortunately, much of the material was still there, and we were able to salvage wood and other materials from 2 other former colony houses that were being torn down. All timber had been milled from local sources. While not original to the Cash house, the replacement materials were for the same time and place. We also salvaged an original colony sink and a bathtub.
We did purchase the house in 2011, thanks to some support from the Cash family. And this is Tommy Cash and Roseanne Cash approaching the house for the first time after we bought it. They had agreed to do a series of benefit concerts. First, the Johnny Cash Music Festival at Arkansas State, but they approached this house, and I have to tell you that Roseanne got as far as those front steps about where she is now, and she just stopped and turned around and could not bring herself to go in because it just really did not look like the house that her dad had grown up in. So by this time, we were working with the Arkansas Rural Heritage Development Initiative, and that's Beth Wiedauer that you see in the middle, who was the field representative for the project for the Rural Heritage Development Initiative, and our architect was Aaron Ruby. And then over on the left is the mayor of Dice, who had been instrumental in bringing the project along to the point when we took over. And when Larry stepped down as mayor, he became a full-time employee of our project. We also use heritage studies students on all of our projects, but you see here standing between Paula and me are Elusta and Mariah East, 2 sisters who were very instrumental in coming up, working on an overall interpretive plan, as well as working with Joanne Cash and other family members to identify placement of furnishings in the house. One of the first things we had to tackle was figuring out how to keep the house level. The town of Dice is made up of gumbo soil. And this kind of soil, when it's wet, it expands and it's sticky. It sticks to your boots, it sticks to your equipment. And when it's dry, it dries up and it cracks. And the cracks are so big that people say that a mule could break its leg in one of the cracks. So we had to figure out what to do because all of the houses, because of this movement, are all sagging in the middle. And in this case, the piers, the concrete piers that the house sat on also had rolled over and sunk into the ground. So the house was literally dragging on the ground. So what we did finally, we marked the location, then we moved it off its footing. We dug a swimming pool, so to speak, that was 8 feet deep and packed it with better draining soil. And then we put a 2-foot wide concrete foundation around the perimeter. We covered that with dirt since it hadn't been, didn't want people to know it was there. And then we set the concrete piers back on the foundation and then set the house back on the concrete. Probably it's true when we say that most of the money for this project was sunk into the ground. This is why.
While we had this deep hole in the ground, we produced a full-scale canvas depiction of the finished house and placed it in front of the hole. This billboard was partly so that passerbyers could see what was going to look like. And the house replica had a dog on the front porch, on the front lawn, that looked so real that people would not get out of their cars to get a closer look for fear the dog would chase them. That's Aaron Ruby there playing with the fake dog. Another problem we faced is that the original cast roof had green shingles. These shingles had been stained with a creosote product that cannot be used today. To replace the roof, each of the new wood shingles were dipped in paint to achieve the right look. The picture on the top left shows a pile of the old shingles. The top middle photo is the new shingles being dried. We learned that after several years, the green fades. So we have had to respray the roof twice, including just last month. You can see how the shingles have turned brown. We took the original wood shingles and created commemoratives with Ray and Carrie Cash, House 266, engraved on each shingle. These were given to each Cash family member at the completion of the restoration.
So we really could not have done without the Cash family on this project. Joanne and her brother Tommy were both born in the house and grew up in the house. And they remembered where every stick of furniture was and were able to describe them to us. And a couple of pictures here. One of them on the right, that's Joanne and her husband, Harry Yates. We were doing a walkthrough one day and she was telling us where her mama's piano had sat. And she said, oh, I wish we knew where mama's piano was today. And the mayor was with us and he said, well, I know where it is. It's in the community center. It's been sitting back in the storage room. So we went over there and looked at it, and sure enough, it was mama's piano. It even had notes in her handwriting from with what songs she planned to play. And the photo on the left, I guess you can see how thrilled Joanne was that the original Congoleum flooring was found underneath all the layers of new flooring that had been added. And I say Congoleum, it's kind of like linoleum, but probably a cheaper version called Congoleum. So we cleaned this up as best we could. We put it in the house, but we put it first in the dining room instead of the living room where it originally was. And the reason because people don't go in the dining room, it's kind of stanchioned off and you look in there. And so we thought, well, we don't want anybody stepping on this original Congoleum. So the first time Joanne came after we had done this, and we put linoleum that we found from another colony house in the living room, and she walked in and immediately she said, that's not mama's floor. And we said, well, we know, but we're trying to protect it. So we've moved it into the dining room. She said, well, but that's not where mama had it. So we moved it back and we started requiring visitors to wear booties, take off their shoes and wear booties when they came into the house. But eventually all of the traffic through the house started showing some wear on the Congoleum. And so we did pick it up and move it again into the dining room. And I think Joanne understands that. So this was interesting. Based on their descriptions of the furniture, we created a database, kind of like a bridal registry, where we listed everything that was needed in the house, the number of each things, like they had 6 coal oil lamps, for instance, and so we had a drawing of the lamps and the number, but everything that was in the house, we had a picture or a drawing of it and the number needed. And then people could either find it on eBay for us and send us the money to buy it, or they might have it as part of their own personal collection, or it might have been in their family for years. And so if they wanted to donate it, they did so, and they marked it in the database so that it was taken off the list of things that we needed. And the result is we had more than 200 people who helped us in furnishing this house. Well, one of the problems that we had was that Joanne had described a chair and a sofa in the living room. Had kind of a nubby navy blue fabric, and the couch had 3 cushions, and there was we looked everywhere and we couldn't find anything. And we were about 2 weeks away from our VIP tour, which was a tour that we were having for the Cash family and all the people that had donated. We still hadn't found it, but we had found a pink chair that had no cushion and a matching pink sofa. We found these in California. And so Paula said, well, let's just go ahead and get them. You know, we got to do something. And so we got the 2 pieces. We paid very little for them, but we paid an exorbitant price for shipping them. And then Paula got 36 cans of blue cloth fabric spray, and she painted these 2 pieces of furniture the navy blue, which when Joanne saw it for the first time said it was exactly what she had.
Okay, the result of all the donations is seen in the photos above. A few of the items in the house are original to the Cash family. Mrs. Cash's handbag and an Afghan that she made is on their bed. A shaving mug and brush and other small items from Johnny's father are in this room too. There's the small chest you see under the mirror in the top left picture is a replica of one made by Johnny Cash in his shop class in Dice. The original is in the administration building where it can be better protected. The restoration work on the house was funded through the annual Johnny Cash Music Festival, which started at the First National Bank Arena on the A-State campus. The concert moved to the field adjacent to the house in 2017 and became a 3-day Johnny Cash Heritage Festival. We also had a number of special event fundraisers, including an event with Roseanne Cash at the Governor's Mansion, a project kickoff benefit, a dinner on the grounds at Whitten Farms, and a Gary Morse benefit concert in Jonesboro. The result is that the house restoration was completed entirely with festival proceeds and private donations. Recently, replicas of the original smokehouse, chicken coop, and outhouse were added to the backyard. Future plans call for rebuilding the barn that will serve as a conference and special events facility.
So we don't have time to go into any of our other projects because we want to allow time for questions. But I did want to mention on the VCK's house that this house was also put on Preserve Arkansas's endangered list back in 2006 because, no, not 2013, excuse me, because it literally was just a few days away from the wrecking ball. The university was going to tear it down, sorority houses, and there was such an outcry from retired faculty members and some of the current faculty that the house was given a reprieve, and it is now the offices for the Arkansas State University Heritage Sites. So I have to say that Paula and I have worked with some really great people over the years. We've been proud to mentor a number of heritage students. We have loved getting up and going to work every day, and we've loved all of our projects, and we still love them, even though now they are in great hands with the new leadership. We'll stop here and turn it over to questions.
Thank you, Sue. That was excellent. We have a couple questions, and anybody else who has a question, please feel free to type it in the Q&A now. Okay, the first one. I'll imagine that you are aware of the Hollywood Plantation, or the Taylor House in Drew County, owned by the University of Arkansas at Monticello. After being restored and developed with a visitor center, parking lot, and addition of outbuildings, UAM has let it sit without further development. Do you have suggestions for locals to get this project resumed?
Well, that's really tough. They were working on the Taylor Plantation at the same time we were working on Lakeport. So we did, follow a lot of that, and we followed some of the locals who wanted to do something to save it, and ultimately gave it to the University of Arkansas at Monticello. It's very now, and one reason why I said that we haven't taken on any more projects is because it's very difficult to get operating funds now. You can get grants to do preservation work, not as many available as there were, but you can get preservation grants, but the operating funds are really difficult. One thing that some communities have considered is, some kind of a tax with the proceeds going to a project to benefit that. I know they've done some work with the museum in Blythe with the city supporting that. So, they need to have a good pocket of support in addition to the university, because the funds just aren't there.
Thank
Paula,
you.
do you have anything else on that, Paula? Okay.
No, I just wish they'd open it up. It's a beautiful place.
It is beautiful, and all the work is done. It just needs exhibits. So, yes, hopefully that will happen soon. The next question, what was your most unique find in the Hemingway Pfeiffer house restoration as far as personal items of the family or Hemingway that you placed in the museum?
Well, probably an alpine skiing book that Ernest Hemingway stole from the Hotel Taub in Schruens. The year he was married to his first wife, and he and his first wife, along with his second wife, who started out as a friend of his first wife, they all went skiing in Taub at the Hotel Taub, and there was a book in the hotel. It has Hotel Taub stamped all over it, but Ernest has written his name in it, and he took it, and somehow it wound up at the Pfeiffer house in Piggott. So we have that on display with his signature.
That's funny. Okay. Oh, somebody's saying, can you just come to Northwest Arkansas?
We are retired. We're
retired.
Well, now you're going to go. This is going to be the start of the Ruth and Paula show, and I can see you taking the show on the road. Okay, next question. Oh, somebody says, I have a million questions. However, I need to watch this program at least 3 more times. Amazing body of work.
Thank you.
That's very nice. Well, I must say we had a hard time cutting this down, because every time we put a slide in, we thought of another thing that we got to share that with them. And there are just so many things that happen at each of these projects, and they're each so different.
Mm-hmm. Okay, one more. Is it difficult to find qualified contractors to work in restoration?
Yes.
Yes, and that's one reason why. That's one reason why some of our projects were so expensive, because we often had to get contractors from quite a ways away, because all of our projects were in rural areas, and so people had to come from Little Rock or Memphis, and then most contractors, they want to take, well, I won't say most, But some contractors want to take the shortcuts. And, we had people saying, oh, you really want to strip this door down to its original finish. We could buy a new door that would look just like that and be a lot less trouble and a lot less expensive. And, we heard that all the time. We had a problem with getting correct estimates on projects because contractors don't know about rest, and they were estimating what it would cost to do some kind of a cheap version or whatever. And so, yes, it was a problem. Paula, what would you say?
I would say that too, except the contractors that we did work with after they knew what we were wanting, they worked with us as closely as they could. So yeah, we didn't have a bad contractor, but they just wanted to do the easy way now with the nail gun or with, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I think now all the contractors that we work with, they take great pride and ownership of the project, and they understand what we were trying to do. But it was difficult to find them or to convince them at first that, yeah, this is really the way we want to do it.
Oh no,
Right.
Here come Ruth and Paula, look out.
I'm sure they didn't think that, but it's the problem with preservation trades. That's something that's a nationwide problem that we are working to address. I have some questions for you. How have the heritage sites throughout the Delta helped the region economically?
Well, I mentioned earlier that was one of the reasons that we got into this, is that we hoped they would serve as an economic catalyst in the communities. And it's very difficult to measure the economic benefits of tourism in particular, because tourism is such a broad industry it's not just a factory that you can count how many widgets it produced, but it's a collection of the restaurants and the hotels and the gift shops and all these other things. So it's difficult to measure, but what we can say, a couple of things. One, now Piggott is a town of 3,900 people, and within 2 years of us opening that site, the town added 18 new tourism related bed and breakfast, restaurants, service station, gift shops. And so, that's highly significant in a town that size. The other thing I can say is that the tourism department does statistics each year on travel and tourism related economic factors. And we look closely at those each year. And in the counties where we have heritage sites, every year they have pretty much either they look at economic factors like number of visitors, how much spent, how much local taxes were paid, how much state taxes were paid, how many jobs, how much payroll. And we looked at that, and in these 4 counties, we were pretty much even with the state average in most cases. And in some cases, we were even above the state average. And so I think that's pretty significant when you consider that most of these counties where we were working were very poor on, all the other economic factors are very down, and so for them to stay apace with the state in tourism, we think is significant.
Okay, I have one more question, unless this is your last call if you're on the webinar to type a question in, but I'll ask one more. Is there at least one or more heritage sites throughout the Delta that you, if there was all the money, that you needed and you were not retired, is there another site that you would pick to be part of the A-State Heritage Sites program?
Actually, when we started the Heritage Sites office, which was back in 1999, is when, we opened the Hemingway Pfeiffer Museum in 99, and then we stepped away and set up this Heritage Sites office. And at that time, there were 2 projects that I said, oh, I wish these projects. And one was the Johnny Cash Boyhood home, because it was in such terrible shape, which we wound up serendipitously receiving. The other one was doing something about the Sultana disaster in Marion and restoring some building there to serve as a museum there. And fortunately, that's also becoming a reality because the town of Marion stepped up. Paul and I did work on a committee with them up front, and the bottom line is that they have opened a temporary museum and are getting ready to restore a building and move their new museum in there. So those are really the two main ones that we were interested in.
Okay. And they got some money appropriated during this past legislative session, I believe.
Absolutely.
Yeah, they did.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's great for them.
Yeah.
I look forward to seeing that come to fruition.
Yeah.
There's somebody in the chat. Oh, somebody just saying, thanks for all your hard work restoring these treasures.
Our
So, thank
pleasure.
you.
We loved it.
Yeah.
Well, that's evident because seeing some of the before photos, that's the kind of thing that people look at and say that can't be saved. So, to prove that wrong and complete the project, that's wonderful. That's what we're all here doing, preservation work. That's why we're all doing. So thank you, Ruth and Paula, so much
Thank you.
for this excellent
Thank you.
program. You're welcome. Thank you for participating. And now I'm going to share a couple more slides to finish us out. There we go. Please join us for our next program, which will be on August the 10th at 3:30 in the afternoon. We will hear from Rose Schweikart, who is the owner of Superior Bathhouse Brewery in Hot Springs National Park. And if you've not met Rose, I encourage you to join. You should get a kick out of her presentation. Not only is she the one who has done the historic tax credit project to restore the Superior Bathhouse, but she's also the brewer, and she runs the brewery. And finally, please follow us on social media and visit our website to learn more about all the things that Preserve Arkansas does, and support our efforts year-round by becoming a member at preservearkansas.org. Thank you for watching this afternoon. Have a good evening. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.